ጥናት ሚኒስትሪ በአሜሪካ ሜሪላንድ ከተማ ከሚገኘው የኢትዮጵያ ኮሚኒቲ ህብረትና ሞንጎመሪ ኮሌጅ ጋር በመተባበር በህብረተሰባችን ውስጥ ስላለው የአካል ጉዳተኞች ሁኔታ ትኩረት የሚያደርግ የግማሽ ቀን ፎረም ባሳለፍነው ሳምንት እሁድ መጋቢት 15 ቀን በአሜሪካ በሲልቨር ስፕሪንግ ሜሪላንድ መካሄዱን የደረሰን መረጃ አስታውቋል። በእለቱ መንፈሳዊ መሪዎች ለአካል ጉዳተኞች ያላቸውን ድጋፍ ከመግለጻቸውም በላይ በህብረተሰቡ ውስጥ ስለ አካል ጉዳተኞች ሁኔታ የግንዛቤ ለውጥ እንዲመጣ የበኩላቸውን ለመስራት ቃል ገብተዋል። በተጨማሪም ከኮሌጅ፣ ከመንግስታዊ አካላት፣ ከሆስፒታልና ግብረሰናይ ድርጅቶች የተውጣጡ ተወካዮች አካል ጉዳተኛ ወገኖችን በትምህርት በጤናና በተለያየ መንገዶች እርዳታ የሚያገኙበትን መንገድ የሚጠቁም መልእክቶችን አቅርበዋል።
He is the director of Montgomery County Public School, Department of Special Education. He's going to talk about disability and special education in Maryland, DC, and the DC area public systems. Mr. Philip will be share different type of information. What are the things parents need to know about education of their disability kids? What resources are available? Now we're going to focus with this DMV area, and then we're going to share what we're going to share as different types of various types of information we need to get separately.
Thank you for having me here, and thank you for putting on this wonderful symposium or workshop. And I think that it's great to hear that you feel as a community that you can take this on and do these types of programs. It's wonderful. I'm not going to say much about myself, but except for the fact that a little bit about me is relevant to you and to your community. So next year will be my 30th year working in the field of special education, and all but the last 4 years in my position of the director were spent serving this community, the Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, in some way, shape, or form. This is my community. This is where I also grew up. So you are my community. I have lived in this community and worked in this community my entire life. That is a little bit of just a circumstance. The director of special education for this large county that serves 20,000 students with disabilities, 163,000 students in Montgomery County, the public school system that I serve, total, and 20,000 students with disabilities, for which I help to support their education through the programs and services that we provide. But I happen to have spent 26 of those years working in this area. I also raised my family in this area as well, right here in Tacoma Park. So I have a son and a daughter. I coached the soccer team for my son up through the time he was in 6th grade. So your children, some of them were probably on the soccer team that I coached or the teams that we played against. My children got to know and become friends with at the local schools, the local public schools, right here in this area. The video with Bob, who was awkward at his place of work, which had a happy ending, right? Because Bob learned a few things as time went along, and then in the end of the video, he wasn't so awkward. He learned how to show respect and be natural around people with disabilities. The only way that happened, and there's a connection to my story about my children and living in this community, the only way that happened was that people with disabilities were welcome in Bob's workplace, and he had an opportunity to learn and grow as he got to know those people, right? Even though it was a challenge for him to the start. It's very important in this day and age when there's so much being said about how different we are and about fear and hatred of the other, people that aren't like us. It's so important for us to remember the gifts that we bring to each other. And so I started my story to say what a gift this community has been to me and to my family. I grew up at a time here when, at the corner of Colesville Road and Fenton, before City Place and before a discussion around there being the Mall of America, I don't know if any of you remember those conversations about building this massive mall there. There was just a J.C. Penney, and most of the people, to be honest, that lived in this area looked a lot like me, right? But then this beautiful community grew up and grew up and grew up, as did other communities, the Salvadoran community, and and more people came to this community, and what a gift the differences have been to each other. I know your community well. I've attended funerals for some students of mine who came through. Of those 20,000, some students with disabilities are so impacted that unfortunately they die at a very early age. I've attended funerals at local churches here and seen the love and respect that you all show each other in such hard times. I've been in the back as a fly on the wall during some of those intimate moments that your community has had together. Just watching, learning. Love and beauty is what stands out to me when I think about this community here. Love and beauty. Such a beautiful community. So I thank you for welcoming me here. And what I'm going to do just for a few minutes, and I'll try not to get too much into the details because I want to share what information I have that you need, but I don't want to share too much, and I'll try not to spend too much time on it. But what I have is a little bit of a description of the process and the services that can be offered in the school system. And when I say the school system, I represent Montgomery County Public Schools. But these processes are very similar for Washington, D.C., for Virginia, because they are processes that are established under federal law, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. In 2004 was enacted. But there was a time not too long ago, in the 1970s and before, where students with disabilities were educated in the basements of churches, in people's homes. Students were not welcome in the schools until these laws came into effect, earlier laws in the 70s, and up until this most recent law, 2004, that we serve today, or that we use today to guide us. But that's federal law, so you could go from state to state and see similar practices. But I'll share a little bit about Montgomery County. So I discussed the federal, state, and local laws that we're guided under. When a student is determined to be eligible for special education services, the school system develops an education program for that student. And the program has some key pieces that I just wanted to make you aware of. The first piece you can see is the foundation. The foundation of this building is called present levels. That's how the student is currently performing. That means everything from how well they're able to communicate, how well they're able to do academic tasks, math, writing, reading, their behavioral needs, are they able to pay attention in class. All of those pieces are that foundation. How do they perform? And then there are some pillars to these plans. One looks at the curriculum that they need to be exposed to, the types of testing that they need to be exposed to. Another pillar are the type of accommodations. Do students need signing, or do they need interpreters, or do they need somebody to read to them, or do they need technology? Those are accommodations. Supplementary aids and services. Those are the teaching practices. What type of teaching strategies do they need? And then the goals. Given where we know they are, their present level, what types of goals do we need? And these plans are written every year, so you would be looking at goals that would be in place for a year. So a reading goal, you say this is where the student is, and given these supports, where do we hope that they will be in a year? And so a student might have a math goal, a reading goal, a writing goal, and those goals would be a part of this plan. And then we would look at the services, that's the roof. The services are really what is going to be happening throughout the school day that's going to help the student to reach those goals. Do they need to have support in the larger classroom with another teacher there, or a teaching assistant there? Do they need to have those accommodations delivered in the classroom? Do they need time to be working on a reading intervention? So those are the services. The other part of the roof says least restrictive environment. That's a kind of a complicated phrase, but what it really says is, it goes back to the video with Bob and back to my children being exposed to children that are not like them. It goes back to this idea that students with disabilities have to be served as much as possible in the general education setting with their peers, as much as possible. And if they're going to be removed for some reason, maybe it's for a speech class, or maybe it's because they need some other types of supports that need to happen in a small group, then the plan has to describe why. You have to say, why do they need to be removed? Okay? The only three things I'll say about this slide really is that there's this process. If you suspect that your student may have a disability, because sometimes disabilities are not so obvious or evident, the videos we saw were all examples of folks who had disabilities that were fairly evident to us. Obviously, you could see that the earlier student had a physical disability because he had a prosthetic leg. You could see that the woman who was blind had a cane. And so you could see those disabilities were visible. But if a student has a learning disability or an attention disability, some other educational disability, it may not always be evident. And so the referral process, meaning the first time you say to the school, I think my student may have a disability, or my child may have a learning disability based on my interaction with them, or and this is where I would often hear it. A family might have a child that comes through the school system, and they see on their own as parents what the typical development looks like for that student. And then another sibling comes along and they start to say, this child is not developing in the same way or same rate, or I see some significant differences or challenges. The referral can come from parents, and that's when you act as advocates for your child. Or it can come from the school. The teachers may be the ones that see this, and they may push the referral forward. If a referral goes forward, there's a discussion about whether there's a suspicion of a disability. If there is, there's an evaluation process where testing can be done. The schools are responsible for that testing. You don't have to go out and spend thousands of dollars to get testing done yourself. The schools can be responsible for that. And then there's an eligibility process where they report out the testing, they talk about what it looks like, and then discussion around whether the student meets the criteria for a disability. The federal government recognizes 14 different categories of disabilities. Some of them are very broad. For example, one is called other health impairment. Well, whenever you see a category that starts with the word other, you know there's going to be a lot that feeds into that. You can't read this, but this is really just a flow chart of the process that I've shared with other schools that talks about the eligibility process. And I can share the presentation with you as well, so folks can see that. When we talk about placement, or where the student will be served, it starts out with how they're performing, what their goals are on their IEP, and what their services look like, and then discussion around where they will be served. The vast majority of our students are served in their home school, their neighborhood school. The vast majority of students. But there are some students for whom they have what I call low incidence disabilities, where in order to serve them, they may go to a school that is in the area or in the cluster. In Montgomery County, we have regional schools, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, that have different types of services. So I'm going to talk a little about what we refer to as the continuum of services. So as I said, the vast majority of our students are served in their home schools, and they can be served with those supplementary aids and services, those teaching strategies. Sometimes that could be what we call a co-taught classroom, where you might have the general education teacher, like the math teacher, and then you might have a special education teacher working alongside them. Sometimes that's a supported class where it's a teacher and a teaching assistant who's there to support the students with disabilities. There might be, if the student needs more support than that, they might get pulled out for small groups. They might be in what we call a self-contained classroom that's still in the larger school, but they may need a smaller classroom setting. And then from there, a very small percentage of students may need to be in a separate school or a private school. These are the range of some of the services that we provide at all of our schools. So all of our schools can provide a common range of services. Those can look like what we call resource services, where a student may have a class or a time in the day where they're getting a support to complete their work, or getting support on one of those goal areas, but they're doing it in a smaller classroom setting. Speech and language services. what we call elementary homeschool model services. Those are the students who can be served in their home school. And then other examples are itinerant, and by itinerant I mean that the teacher may move from school to school for students who have vision, or deaf, hard of hearing, or physical disabilities. Those are students who might be in their home school, but a teacher who is an expert in teaching Braille or working with students on mobility because there are students who are blind, might come to the school for part of the week and then go work with other students in different schools. So we also have what I refer to as regional schools. If it's determined by the education team that, with the parents' input, that a student's needs can't be met in their neighborhood school, it's a big deal. It's a big deal to tell a student and a family, you know, your student's disability is going to be difficult to serve here but we have the services in a neighboring school. And sometimes we have to have those challenging conversations. And these are some of the regional programs we have. So we have school-based learning centers at the elementary level. We have a Learning for Independence program, which is for students with mild to moderate cognitive disabilities. We have school community-based programs. Those are students with cognitive disabilities who also may have other disabilities, like a difficulty with mobility. So a student who's in a wheelchair but also has cognitive disabilities. Augmentative and alternative communication. Those are students who have significant communication needs and may be using a device that at an early age we are teaching them how to use. It may be attached to a wheelchair, and they may be using a computer to help them talk, help them communicate. And we have some core classes for those students when they're young. Physical disabilities. Students with physical disabilities, like the young man you saw in the video, at a very early age, if they need support to learn how to use their prosthetics or their equipment that they work with, they may be in a small class when they're in preschool and maybe in kindergarten, but after kindergarten, most of those students are out in their home schools. We have programs for students who are gifted and talented but also have learning disabilities, and programs for students that have social, emotional, and special education services. The bridge services are programs for students at the middle and high school level who may have difficulty with anxiety or some significant emotional needs, and they really need a more protective, sheltered environment. All of those services happen at comprehensive schools, at the large schools, but they are programs within those schools that are designed to support students with disabilities. So all those students would have access to other peers that are non-disabled. These are also some of the regional programs for students with autism, deaf, hard of hearing, and services for the visually impaired. You'll notice I always say the word students first before I say the disability, and that goes back to the earlier video. It's about the person, not about the disability. You recognize the person first. And language is important. And as somebody who often speaks to folks in the community, I always make sure that I try to model the language that we should all be using. So I don't say an autistic child, because that's the disability first, and then the child. I say a child who's on the autism spectrum, you see? These are our smallest population of students may attend a separate school. Some of these schools are actually combined with other schools, so it's almost like two schools that are connected to each other. So for example, Longview and Stephen Knowles, those are almost like schools that are hospitals. Many folks don't know it, but because we are public educators, we have to serve everybody. Even if a student requires a nurse to be with them all day, throughout the day, just to go to school. We have roughly 100 students that have a private duty nurse who's with them just so they can make it through the school day. And those are often the students in those two schools in the middle there, in Longview and Stephen Knowles. They are separated by, we are a large county. One is actually here in Wheaton. Stephen Knowles is in the Wheaton area. And one is, Longview is in Up County. So they're the same type of school, but they're regional, Up County and Down County. If you went to those schools, you would see students who are some of our most significantly impacted. And we try to support them and their families as much as possible because they're dealing with some real significant challenges. And so it is unfortunately in many cases that I do go to funerals for those students maybe 2 or 3 times a year because those students are so impacted. And I think it's important for people to know that we are here to serve all students, including students who are so impacted and their families. And we do believe that every student can learn regardless. So I appreciate you giving me this time, and it's really meaningful for me to have a moment just to share how wonderful I feel this community is and what a gift it has been to me and my family. So thank you.